It is just past 6 p.m. in the UK, just past 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We are, we're a kind of semi-regular talk TV / podcast on issues of atheism, religion, science, skepticism, and secularism. Just to let you know, you can call in later or at any point. Just add the Skype contact, throw name with logic, send me a PM, let me know the gist of your question, and we'll add you in time. Also, by calling in, you grant us permission to use your likeness for later uploading. Okay, with that out of the way, I'll introduce my guests for the evening, and as always, Kitch.
Hey guys.
And Mortimer.
Hi everyone.
And the second week in a row, you're getting into a habit now again, Lundy. Big Lundy. And now to do a proper introduction of our guest, away you go, Lundy.
All right, welcome to Join with Logic, everybody. Allow me to introduce our guest for today, writer of a couple fantastic books, the first being The God Virus, How Religion Affects Our Lives and Culture, and the second being Sex and Secularism, What Happens When You Leave Religion. Doctorate in Psychology, graduate of Vanderbilt University, one of the most entertaining old men that you'll ever meet, Dr. Darrel Ray.
Good to be on with you guys.
Good to have you on the show, Dr. Ray.
Yeah.
Would you rather I just call you like Darrel or?
Yeah, my friends call me Darrel. My enemies call me Doctor. Yeah.
All right, I'll just call you Darrel then for the show. So, first thing that I noticed when I was looking up details for the introduction and all that kind of stuff, I found that you were raised a fundamentalist Christian in Wichita, Kansas.
Yeah, you don't get much. That's where they murdered doctors.
How do you get from being a fundamentalist Christian in pretty much the epitome of fundamentalist Christianity as far as geography goes to being an outspoken atheist author and psychologist? I don't understand that.
Well, that makes two of us, so yeah. I don't know. It just didn't quite take. I talk in my book Sex and God. I actually look at the genetics, and there's quite a bit of evidence that religiosity is genetically based, and I think my genes got screwed up somewhere along the line. I was the oldest in the family, the goody shoes of the family, and four boys. All my brothers were, they were all out there screwing up and having fun, and I was being good and going to church every Sunday. All my parents and grandparents were missionaries and preachers and that sort of stuff. I was just raised in this stuff, and I thought I'd be a minister myself. I even got a master's degree in religion. So by the end of 2 years of doing a master's degree, I pretty well realized it was all bullshit, and that's when I started leaving. But yeah, it's tough. It's tough if you're raised in a place like, you're from Pennsylvania. It's tough if you're raised in a deeply religious never I never spoke to an atheist in my whole life until probably I was almost finished with college. I'd never even met an atheist. So it's kind of hard to get out if you don't even know there's options. But I did read atheists. I read a lot of atheists, including Birch and Russell and all, and they just didn't exist in Wichita. But I'm glad I did, and having fun doing it. It's kind of fun to go back. I go back to they've got Skeptics of Oz every year in Wichita. The Wizard of Oz is from Kansas, and so I go back and speak at the Skeptics of Oz convention every year in Wichita. It's always kind of fun to kind of thumb my nose at all the fundamentalists that are still there. Needless to say, none of my relatives will speak to me anymore, but not a big loss. I didn't really care to have to go to their house and pray every time. So anyway, get to your question a little bit.
It really does. I understand what you mean when you say like the first atheist you spoke to was like very late in your life. I mean, myself, I actually don't even know of any atheists in my area at all. Like even at the first college that I went to, I'd have to go straight down to the state college, which is a couple hours away, if I'm going to meet anybody like that. My first encounter with atheists was actually on YouTube. Watching Thunderfoot's videos about creationists, watching the Atheist Experience episodes that were uploaded to YouTube. I didn't know anything about it. I was like, this is weird. This is different. Of course, at the time, I still was very skeptical about Christianity, mainly because I think I got lucky. And I'll say this, like, if my family grew up in a small town and we went to church every day, and up till the age of 10, I was going to church every day, every week.
Wow.
I was going to Sunday school every week. I had a church youth group that I went to every Wednesday. I was big into the church. I was a fundamentalist. I believed in the literal interpretation of the Bible. I was exceedingly scared of hell. Like, that was one of the big things. And I didn't actually have time to step back and take a look at my beliefs until we ended up moving to a different town. And my family was like, well, there's no churches nearby, so I guess we're not going to be doing the church thing right now. We won't be focusing on that. So I didn't end up going to church for a while.
You stepped out of that bubble.
Yeah, I ended up not going to church for a while, which gave me a chance to actually look at what it is I was believing. And I went, this stuff really doesn't make a whole lot of sense when you think about it. So I ended up kind of being a backslidden in a way. So yeah, that kind of was my leading, at least through agnosticism. And I was an agnostic for about like 3 years. But I didn't realize that you can be an atheist and an agnostic at the same time. I thought those were mutually exclusive positions. And then again, I saw the Atheist Experience episodes, and I went, now it's clicking.
Yeah, I think Matt and the Atheist Experience are doing an amazing job of educating the entire planet. It's amazing the calls they get on that show from other countries.
Yeah, definitely.
Yep. But one kind of another answer to your question. From very early on, I just felt like one of the things religion was so screwed up on was sex. And the more I learned about sex growing up, the more I realized my church didn't know diddly squat about sex and sexuality. And as a psychologist, you deal with sex a lot. And when I went into my doctoral work and started really getting serious about understanding human sexuality, that's really the straw that broke the camel's back. You can't understand human sexuality and still believe the bullshit that most churches put out about sex. They're not based on anything biological. They're based on dogma. And that, the fact that I just didn't see why you should feel guilty about something that seemed pretty damn natural, pretty, as natural as eating pork. And some religions don't think you should be eating pork. So I think that's stupid too. So those kinds of things start all coming together. But like you say, if you're raised in this stuff, you have to get outside the bubble. And I got outside the bubble by going off to graduate school. I moved away from Wichita and went to Vanderbilt. Well, first of all, went to Scarrett College for Christian Workers. Now that's where I got my master's degree, and you can imagine what that had in it. And then I went on to get my doctorate, and that was really getting out of the bubble. Dealing with human sexuality and dealing with psychology. Once you understand how the brain works, it really makes a big difference, and you start understanding why religion gets so deeply infected in people's brains.
Now,
I just wanted to ask.
Okay, go ahead, Kitch.
I just want to ask, where does this guilt come from about sexuality and being expressive of your sexuality? I just want to know, where does that is that embedded in religion, or is there something else that religion might be taking the cover for? You know what I mean? Is it the mindset, or?
Well, Kitch, it's an excellent question. I usually don't get that question this early in my conversation, so thanks. That's really insightful. Well, I talk about something in my first book. Actually, I have written 4 books. The God Virus is my 3rd book, but the first 2 are on totally different subjects. So in the God Virus, I talk about guilt, and then in Sex and God, I talk about how it ties into religion and sex. But first, you have to understand something that I call the guilt cycle, and it's a pretty simple concept, and that means you go to church. You think about this: when you're when you're very tiny, you start getting programmed around sexuality. For example, my grandmother, when I was like 6 years old, I watched my grandmother virtually slap my brother's hand away from his penis. Now he's less than a year old, getting his diapers changed. He reaches down to touch himself, and my grandmother slaps his hand away. That is a sexual message. He's getting sexual programming, and kid doesn't even know how to talk yet, and he's getting sexual messages. Well, that's what happens. That's what religion starts doing the minute you're born. It's teaching you these sexual, this shame and guilt messages. So by the time you get old enough to really examine this stuff, it's already deeply programmed. You don't even realize how deeply programmed it is inside of you. So religion teaches you to be guilty and feel shame for your body. There's lots. I mean, just read the Bible. Lots of shame messages around starting with Adam and Eve. You know, they were naked. Well, sex negative message in the very first chapter of the Bible. And that just goes downhill from there. So religion teaches you what to be guilty of. You are not born being guilty of any of these things. And the reason we know that, and I write extensively in Sex and God about this, there's lots of cultures that don't teach sexual guilt. They think, I mean, the Manganian culture in the South Pacific is a very sex-positive culture. And so we know it's not a natural, normal thing to feel guilt. But what religion does is say, we're going to teach you guilt. And then we're going to give you the disease, and then we're going to give you the fake cure. You come back and get forgiveness at our particular church. So if you're a Presbyterian or Calvinist, you got to go get guilt forgiveness from a Calvinist church. If you're a Catholic, you have to go back to confession. So guilt is, at least in my estimation, guilt is the most important component of religious infection. Without guilt, they have a hard time holding on to you. Does that answer that a bit?
Yeah, that's. It's funny when sorry. Yeah, that really does answer my question. It's just, what about the religions that I know of that promote finding their deity through sex? Are there certain cultures that might do that?
They're very, very rare, and let's be careful about that, because some advertise themselves one way but act a different way. For example, Buddhism. Buddhism we hear about, it's really California Buddhism. You go look at Thailand Buddhism, you go look at Tibetan Buddhism. Those are very sex negative. Buddhism is a very sex negative religion. But you listen to the California Buddhists talk about it. Oh, you can find God through sex kind of stuff. Yeah, in California maybe, but you don't see that. Those kinds of religions are rare. Hinduism at one point in time was much more sex positive than it is now. I mean, we got the Kama Sutra, for example, but that's an embarrassment to Hinduism now. They do not advocate what is espoused Kama Sutra. In fact, right now, out of 202 countries in the world, I think India is now something like 154 worst country in the world for treatment of women. Well, that's pretty sexy if you're treating women that badly. You know, you've seen the big rape scandals in India recently.
Yeah.
And it was no big deal. Nobody, the politicians didn't think it was a big deal. And it's all her fault for not resisting properly and all that kind of stuff. Well, people say, well, Hinduism's sex positive. No, it's not. Buddhism is not. The only sex positive religions really are things like Unitarians. They're sex positive. And pagans and Wiccas, those are pretty sex positive religions. But they are teeny tiny religions. They're a minor size. And you'll notice the most sex positive religions are not growing. They're dying. You're not seeing some people joining the Unitarian Church. You're seeing a lot joining the guilty Baptist Church or Presbyterian, fundamentalist Presbyterian branches and stuff.
Because they introduce the kind of hook for the fish, so to speak, and the sex positive religions don't introduce that. So there's little compulsion to keep the people there, which is weird, because I would think that if there's a religion that shows you that something that you do is a good thing, something that you naturally do, something that you naturally come across as a good thing, you would think that would attract more members, but apparently the thing that attracts more members is the whole guilt thing.
Right, right. And about it's probably been somewhere around 2,600 years ago. Religions discovered this guilt cycle piece, and they started using it. I mean, Judaism started using it, Zoroastrianism started using it, later Christianity, and then later Islam. Every one of the major religions use sex negative, guilt-based, shame-based messages. And it keeps you, but here's the reason why it works. They make you feel guilty about something you're going to do anyway. That means when you do it, the only place you can get forgiven is the church you learned it at. You never hear of Catholics confessing to Muslim imams. And you never hear of Muslims confessing to Baptist ministers. Because a Baptist can only get forgiveness at the Baptist church. They can't go get forgiveness at another church. So that's why it's a cycle. It brings you back to the place you learned the guilt in the first place.
We have a few questions from the audience, generally the same guy. Grim King, one of our guests, asked the question, you've said before that religiosity may have a genetic component to it. In that case, in that light, does the birth rate of Christians and Muslims matter concerning the religiosity of a country?
Well, it could well have an effect on it. The problem is when you mix genes up, you don't know what you're going to come out. It's like going to the casino, throwing some dice. If two parents are very religious, there's a higher probability, just like if two parents are both blue-eyed and blonde-haired, there's a high probability you're going to come out with a blonde-haired, blue-eyed kid. But lo and behold, lots of blonde-haired, blue-eyed people have non-blue-eyed, blonde hair kids, you know. Now that could just be because the genes got mixed up and the dominant recessives got mixed up and somebody comes out with a different, or it could be somebody's messing around when they shouldn't have been. And we know religionists mess around far more than they ever admit to. I mean, I've been doing some research, well, I did a lot of research for the book, but continuing research around divorce rates and affairs and things like that. And among Christians, the divorce rate is 50%. Christians have the highest divorce rate as anybody else, even a little bit higher. And ironically, Christian ministers have divorce rates equal to the general population. So what we do know about the genetics is it's only 50% genetic. The other 50% comes from other contributions, the epigenetic and the cultural. So I write about in Sex and God, there's three components to your behavior, the genetic, the epigenetic, and the cultural. And the cultural is probably less than or about a quarter of your behavior. So parents who raise kids, you see these parents who are super religious and they raise their quiver full of kids. They have 7 or 8 kids, and there's always, it seems like, 1 or 2 that leave the religion, and never come back. So that's pretty good proof that the genes aren't totally determinate. There's a lot of other things going on. Just like you could have 2 heterosexual parents have a gay kid. That's just happens. And of course the religious people think that's horrendous. I have a gay child. Go pray the gay way or something. But that's the way genes and epigenetics work. I don't know if the audience is familiar with epigenetics.
We did have Christopher Wanjek on, the health journalist, and we had a good long talk. Oh, and Massimo Pigliucci as well. We went into epigenetics then.
Okay, great. Well, then they probably understand it. But yeah. I think there's components to all that. So I don't know if that answers your questioner's question, but.
Okay, I think we've got another question on the.
We have another question, and then we have a caller who wants to call in. I'm going to get to the question first. Does Dr. Ray think that schools, government, I hesitate to ask that part of the question, and other suck organizations use the guilt cycle?
Oh, absolutely they do. In the U.S., and I'm sure it happens in others, we have this whole abstinence-only training. And it's in our schools, and the federal government pays for abstinence-only training. A big part of abstinence-only training is, just say no to something you're going to do anyway. We know for a fact, and the research from the U.S. government shows, that abstinence-only training does not work. So what's the purpose of having abstinence-only training if you've got millions of dollars worth of research showing it doesn't work? Well, it brings kids and keeps kids involved in religion. That's what it does. What we see in kids that go through abstinence-only training is they delay the onset of actual penis and vagina sex. They don't delay other kinds necessarily. They delay penis and vagina sex for anywhere from 3 to 5 months. But what happens then is they have penis and vagina sex without protection, because they've been told in abstinence-only training that condoms don't work and that it's a sin to use birth control. Or they may not be told it's a sin to use birth control, but they're told so many different ways. These teachers are well trained to just walk that fine line between being religious and secular. And they are always trying to give guilt messages to these kids in abstinence-only training without openly saying, oh, God will send you to hell if you have sex before marriage. The funny thing is, every one of those teachers had sex before marriage. And when they're asked, they deny it. Because we know that 95% of all, at least in the United States, 95% of all in the United States have sex before they. Did I get off track too much there? I can't remember what the question was.
Yeah, I just want to chime in here as a teacher and say that those teachers that teach crap like that make me feel ashamed of my profession.
Well, that's great, because you should be ashamed of those folks. They're perpetuating all sorts of crap. But it's our tax dollars teaching guilt. To get those kids go back to church, they go have sex with their girlfriend or their boyfriend, feel guilty about it, go back to church. And the schools are participating in this. And most of the time, not all the time, but I would say 90% of the time, the teachers teaching abstinence only are also very religious themselves. Secular teachers are going to go out and tell kids condoms don't work. That's a religious message.
Yeah. I just wanted to just comment and say that
I'm sorry. It can also be that the teachers are forced to teach the curriculum or they'll get fired. And that's a huge problem.
In some states it is, yeah. In most states, though, the abstinence-only stuff is taught by volunteers.
Yeah, sure.
I just wanted to comment and say that I went to a Catholic school, and there was it was kind of an interesting setup, because the actual sex ed kind of portion, it was progressive. It was safe sex, keep to a single partner, good sex positive education. And then when it came to the religious teachers, they, for some reason, started going on abstinence only just when they almost felt like it, almost when they were in English or religious studies, they talk about sex abstinence only. And most of us were pretty much, we're not buying it.
Wow, what a set of mixed messages there.
Yeah.
But it really makes the religion look stupid.
Yeah, and my sex education was they showed a video of some salmon mating. And I'm not doing that. That's true. That was it, yeah.
Salmon mating?
Yep. And I'm just like, well, I'm glad I didn't grow up thinking that was the correct technique to use when I got a girlfriend. You can imagine that would be a bit strange. Yeah.
It's like you're going to die when you have sex, just letting you know.
Yeah.
Well, you know something, there's something to that. I talk about that in one of my chapters, that what religion does is it tries to tie sex with death.
Yeah.
And there's a very strong connection with that. And here's the way it works. It's called death neurosis. Earlier, somebody said, I can't remember who it was, said they were scared to death of going to hell. And that is death. That's a part of the death neurosis. Yeah. A neurosis, a neurotic person exhibits unnatural fear or aversion to something that's not that threatening or that problematic. So what religion does is teach you incredible fear of hell. Well, there is no hell, so being afraid of hell is definitely unnatural. But then what it turns around and says is, if you have the wrong kind of sex, you're going to hell as well. So in that sense, they tie sex and death together. It's a brilliant strategy. And what happens then is it means Jesus comes into your bedroom and watches the kind of sex you're having. If you're having the wrong kind of sex, you go straight to hell, do not pass go. Especially if you're having gay sex, or anal sex, or oral sex, or you happen to masturbate. Of course, that's wrong among you Catholics, and everybody else, of course. But I use the term it's a threesome with Jesus. If you're a married religious person, well, if you're in bed with anybody, Jesus is watching. You're having a threesome with Jesus, which is pretty sick. I don't know if he's getting himself off or not, but anyway, that's. You guys are.
It's more he's like third viewer and he's looking at you, shaking his head in contempt. It's very guilty. I'd like to welcome our first caller to the show, Jay. Do you have a question for Dr. Ray, or rather Darrel?
Hi, Dr. Ray. Interesting topic. I want to talk about Islamic culture and how the Islamic culture put fear, especially in girl mind, from her body and from the pleasure in making love and all of that. This is ironic situation. From since we are children, or the community tell the girl, you are shame. You should cover everything in your body. You are the one is drive the guys to do bad things, and the girl grow up with that concept. That's the psycho concept, abuse concept from the community. So when the girl grow up, when you look to the mirror to herself, see the shame. She is not proud for her body, or she's not proud even if she is imagination, some sexual imagination as natural should be. She's feel guilty, so and she's feel even dirty. How can? Yeah, go ahead, doctor.
Well, I just want to compliment you. That is a very, very good summary of Islam and how it works. I actually spent quite a bit of time writing about that. Islam is a very interesting study in human sexuality. So let me illustrate what you're saying. And I try to discriminate between guilt and guilt and shame. And you've used both terms as you describe Islam. Well, what different religions use guilt and other religions use shame more. Almost all religions use guilt and shame, but they use them at different measures. Islam uses shame much more than it uses guilt. And here's the way it works. Guilt is an individualistic emotion. I feel guilty when I masturbate because I know Jesus saw me. Now I have to pray and ask forgiveness. Nobody else needs to know that I did that for me to feel guilty. Shame is very different. Shame is a communal illness. The entire community feels shame. So when a Muslim girl dresses inappropriately or has a relationship with a boy when she shouldn't be, or writes a letter to somebody she shouldn't be writing a letter to that's sexually explicit or something, then once that's found out, the entire family feels shame, and that brings shame back on the entire community. What I've identified is it's a patriarchal religions. The more patriarchal a religion is, the more it uses a shame-based system, And Islam is about as patriarchal a religion as there is on the entire planet. There's one other religion that comes in a distant second, and that's Mormonism. Mormonism is a very patriarchal religion as well. But so what you get is a religion that teaches women shame at every level. From the minute they're born, they're taught shame, shame, shame. And when they get to be sexually mature, they have to cover everything because it's the fault of the woman for any direction in terms of the males around them. And if a woman gets raped, in some cultures, she is the guilty party. She can be killed for having been raped by her own brother, by her own father, by a neighbor or an uncle or whatever. I mean, it's an insidious system that puts the onus for protection of the sexuality on the female. And here's why it works so well. Patriarchal cultures say that women are owned by men. The father owns the daughter, and he has to protect her virginity until he sells her to a husband or gives her away in marriage. And then the husband has the right to expect a virgin when he gets married to her. And then from then on, he owns her. He owns her sexuality. It's an ownership system. And that's what Islam is. If you just understand the concept of ownership, that really explains a hell of a lot. Islam teaches boys since the day they're born that you own the women around you. In Saudi Arabia, a 12-year-old kid can escort his mother to the market where she cannot go alone. Well, that's telling the whole world this 12-year-old's got the power over his own mother. That's just insane. But that's the way that particular religion works. I've gone on too long about that, but it's a beautiful system if you want to keep people locked in to a religion.
I totally agree with you, Doctor. And the worst thing, this girl and that boy grow up with that shame and the honor things. Like the girl, she's not human being. She's just subject for sex. The ironic here, the community refuse any sign of sexuality in a girl. In the same time, the community consider the girl sex object in the same time. That's ironic, really. Another point, another point is the intimacy. A lot of religion people grow up without real know what the meaning of the intimacy, because the father never hold and kiss the mother in front of the children, and never appear that level of intimacy the children need to learn through. Children need to see the intimacy. I don't mean the actual process of making love, but I mean the intimacy, the hug, the kiss, the all of that. Children, when you grow up in religion culture, grow up without learning what the mean of intimacy, and even they are afraid to express about their love when become adults, because they feel it is wrong or weak.
Can I interrupt here? I totally agree with you. And let me illustrate how that works, because what you have identified is Islam, but Christianity does it too, and Mormonism. A lot of them discourage intimacy, a public intimacy, even among married people. So children get no image of what good interpersonal, intersexual relationships look like, because they don't even see the man or woman kissing or hugging or touching each other. But think about this. If you were a child in the Hadza culture in Africa, or if you were a child in the Manganian culture in South Pacific, or a child in the Iroquois culture 300 years ago or 400 years ago before the Europeans invaded, you would have the opportunity not just to see your parents having intimate kissing. You might even see your parents having sex. I mean, think about it. The Iroquois Indians lived in a gigantic lodge, and there might be 40 or 50 people in this lodge. There was no privacy. Where do you have sex? Well, you have sex right in the middle of the lodge, in your sleeping area. And nobody paid much attention because sex was just a natural part of being human. So you get this extreme of a lot of cultures, especially hunter-gatherer cultures or early farming communities where they lived communally. Sex was a common part of everyday living, and it wasn't hidden. When you hide your sexual behavior, you're saying that is the important sign of shame. When you can't be open about who you are and what you are, you're giving shame messages. You're telling everybody in the world, I am ashamed of my body. I'm ashamed to show affection. And different cultures do this in more or less degrees, but Islam is the worst, absolutely the worst on the planet, I believe. There's just very few religions that could even be close to that. So I agree with you, and I just want to contrast for the listening audience how much different our sexual perceptions would be if we lived in an Iroquois lodge and we saw people having sex every day and nobody thought a thing about it. Well, here's another thing. In South India, women used to routinely be topless. It's a very hot climate. I mean, 110 degrees Fahrenheit, 45 degrees Celsius or more. So women were not required to wear tops until Islam invaded India. When Islam invaded India, even though they did not conquer South India, they did rule South India, and they enforced women dressing more modestly. Can't go to South India and see women walking topless, whereas 500-600 years ago they were walking topless, or even more, maybe 700 years ago. So you can see the influence whenever Islam enters into a country, a new area. It's like an infection. It's like an invasive species coming into a new ecosystem. It takes over that ecosystem, that cultural ecosystem, and forces its incredibly sexually repressive ideas. Christianity does the same thing. It did it in South America. When Catholicism came into South America, one of the first things they did, put your clothes on. When Presbyterians came into Hawaii, first thing they did was say, put your clothes on. And if you don't, you're going to die. And of course, in Hawaii, half the population had a scarlet fever and smallpox within a very short period of time. So if you tell people God's punishing you for not having your clothes on, and half your population dies, you're probably going to start believing they're God after a while.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Insightful comments on your part.
Their gods, the all gods with S, they, like the theists said, they create human being naked. So how is after that punish us because we don't want to be like their gods created? That's ironic. The point that I agree with you totally again, Islamic is the worst religion as religion. I don't say as a people. As religion is the worst religion. I think so. Even humanity, no. It is abuse human rights in every level. It is awful in every level. Really, I cannot imagination there is other religion awful like Islam. I know there is all religion is the silly and nonsense. It is the
We're starting to lose you, Jay.
Well, let me just respond a little bit to what she's saying there. The fact is, sex is my hypothesis that I explore in Sex and God is that sex is the fundamental, foundational component of of all the major religions. And Islam has found that the more you make people feel shame and guilt, the more you can hold on to people, the more you can keep them within Islam. Right now, the biggest threat to Islam is Western sexual ideas. And they're doing everything they can to prevent Western sexual ideas from seeping into their culture. And they're doing a hell of a lot of work to do that. Everything from censoring the internet in Saudi Arabia and Iran to punishing people who look at pornography. Now, the interesting thing is that if they are given, there's high levels of pornographic consumption among the elites of Saudi Arabia, and you can just tell that by, by some of the research on what websites are being visited from where. So they're doing it, but they don't want women to see it. It's men. They want to keep women from seeing all this stuff. And in Islam, men are given a lot more leeway. A man can can fly an airplane from Saudi Arabia to the Netherlands and pay a prostitute and do whatever he wants with no guilt. And Muhammad did not condemn that. But if a woman got in a plane and went to the Netherlands and decided to have a boyfriend or a sexual dalliance, she could have her head cut off. So there's huge differences. And so it's incredible inequality in sexual permissiveness. But what this does is it breeds abuse. It breeds misogyny, and Islam, and I don't want to just rag on Islam, but it is the worst, I think. But I think Christianity and forms of Christianity are just about as bad. Mormons are, they're pretty darn bad. Fundamentalist Presbyterians and Baptists are pretty darn bad too.
Thank you, Dr. Ray.
My pleasure.
I will leave now. I am really appreciated your appear in Trolling with Logic.
Great.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Good. Thank you.
Thanks for the call, Jay.
Calling.
Right.
Always a pleasure.
Yeah, we also appreciate you showing up on the show. It's always good to have a fairly well-known person come on the show and give us a little bit of attention. Our tiny little podcast that we got going on. So we have a couple more questions from the audience, both from a user named Polymath. The first question he asks is kind of a fun one. Can God make a bus full of children so sexy that even he cannot resist them?
Okay, well, the first answer is there is no God, so no, it's not possible. I don't think so. But he can make a bus full of children so sexy that a Catholic priest can't resist them.
I don't like that.
So I hope that answers your questioner's question.
I would say so. The second question he asks, what are your views on incest and/or polygamy?
Oh, I've got a lot of views on that. First of all, incest is a violation of human rights because it's non-consensual. A parent having sex with a child is non-consensual, and there's a power dynamic there that the child cannot overcome. So that's why it's a human rights violation. That's why it's child abuse. That's why it's child sex abuse, whatever you want to call it. It's absolutely wrong. Now, once somebody gets to be of age, 18 or over, I don't give a shit what they do. If it's consensual, I realize there's laws against it in many countries, but what are you going to do? People can do whatever they want when they become 18. I still think there's a power dynamic issue there. I think it may or may not need to be illegal, but I know in the professions, like in my profession, the power dynamic is such a difficult and important issue. The psychologists will be thrown out of the profession and probably put in jail too if they would have sex with a client. So all I'm saying is sex needs to be totally consensual. In fact, sex needs to be something that's entered into enthusiastically. There should be no coercion around sex and sexuality. If there's coercion, that means there's a power dynamic going on that's inappropriate. So and I'm not saying anything negative about the BDSM community, because there's power dynamics in the BDSM community, but those are all consensual, and they're oftentimes, well, and they're always, most of the time, done with great enthusiasm. So the rule of thumb is, if people aren't engaging in consensual adult sex with total consent and enthusiasm, then it's probably wrong. And that's a good way to look at it. So that was the incest part of it. The second part of this question, remind me.
Polygamy.
The second part was polygamy, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Polygamy is a cultural construct, and polygamy is a component of patriarchal religion. It started with agriculture. I write about this early in Sex and God. How did polygamy come about? Well, polygamy is based in the concept of that females are owned by the male, and the male needs to know where his progeny come from. So the male controls the female, much like a gorilla tries to control its females. You know, a male gorilla, silverback, tries to dominate females, as do bull cattle, you know, and things like that, or bull seals, elephant seals, I'm sorry. So you need to know, in agriculture, you need to know where your progeny are coming from so you can give your land. And that's what agricultural did to us. It created polygamy. So I am dead set against polygamy. I think it is wrong. It's based on the ownership of women. It's a violation of human rights. Now, that doesn't mean I'm against plural marriages. A woman should have husbands as she wants, or as many boyfriends as she wants. And a man should have as many girlfriends as he wants. And if they want to make them wives, that's fine too. I just think we need to be careful how that all constructs, because if you look at polygamy in the community, those women are oftentimes raised from the day they're born with the expectation that they will be men, and they'll have very little choice. And you either go marry the guy we tell you to marry, or we'll kick you out of the community and you'll be homeless. Well, that's not engaging enthusiastically in that relationship. Coercion. And it may be coercion only in the sense that they know nothing better. They've not been educated, or they've been educated in a very narrow sense. So polygamy itself is generally a violation of human rights. I'm very cautious about that. But I am a big proponent of poly. I think people can love as people as well. I have 2 kids. I love them both. There's no limit to what people can do love-wise. And we've almost all of us had more than one lover in our lifetime, and we probably love these lovers in our own way. So there's no limit to that. Does that answer your question, your questioner's question?
I believe that answers our questioner's question, and I'd like to add a little bit of input for myself. And by the way, speaking as a non-expert, take everything I say with a grain of salt. I do see another problem with polygamy as far as a sociological problem. What I see polygamy doing, like if we were to institutionalize polygamy, perhaps in the United States, I would see sex, marriage, all these things to be less about intimacy and more about competitive nature. We would have people, even if we were to legalize it for both women and men, we would still have people trying to compete to be one of the harem, so to speak, for the exceedingly rich, as it used to happen in the past. At least that's how I see it happening, which would put the poor at a very large disadvantage, because they wouldn't have a whole lot to offer for multiple wives or multiple husbands, and they wouldn't be able to really really take advantage of this new allowance in their love lives. So I do see that as being an issue if that were to ever be institutionalized. And as a concept, I think that's something that would be inevitably problem if you were to ever consider polygamy as a rational option for your relationships.
Well, your comment is actually that little experiment's already been done, and I write about that in a chapter in the book about why is Christianity monogamous, and why is Judaism monogamous? If your listeners probably don't realize that Judaism was very polygamous. I mean, look at Solomon, look at David. All the kings of Israel were polygamous. So throughout Israeli history, there were kings and high officials who had multiple wives. In Jesus' day, Herod had 9 to 15 wives. We know he had at least 9 wives. He probably had as many as 15 wives. Did Jesus ever say one thing negatively about polygamy? There's nothing in the Bible that prohibits polygamy. Even St. Augustine and later Martin Luther both said it cannot be condemned because the patriarchs did it. So we've got this religion that's polygamous. So what happened? Well, what happened is over time, the more wealthy you are, the more wives you can have. But that means the poor get very few wives, and the more the economics change, especially in Islam, in Judaism, when it was being forced out of Israel and the diaspora and the persecutions, it's much more difficult to maintain a polygamous society. Now, the interesting thing about Christianity was, and by the way, Islam did not outlaw polygamy in its religion until the 1100s. It was not formally outlawed for Judaism until the 1100s. Jesus knew polygamous people. He probably interacted with polygamous people. He never said a word about it. That's if he existed. I doubt if he existed in some ways. Then the second is Christianity. Why is Christianity monogamous when, in fact, many of the tribes in the peninsula, Saudi Peninsula, long before Islam came along, were all polygamous tribes. They were hunter-gatherer, they're herder tribes, and the top guy got the most wives. Christianity went into Saudi Arabia, converting Christians all over the place. You can't tell the guy to dump his wives. So what you do is you tell the guy you can convert to Christianity and keep your 4 wives or more, but you have a child, boy, he can only marry 1 woman. The nice thing that happens there is you still get all the money and wealth of that polygamous man, and you convert the whole society into a monogamous society in about 2 generations. And that's actually the way it worked. Christians don't talk about that. But when Paul was running around doing his thing in the Mediterranean, he was interacting with polygamous people all over the place. And that's why he says I believe Timothy, a bishop should only have 1 wife. Imply that if you're not a bishop, you can have as many wives as you want. So even Christianity was polygamous in its early days.
Yeah.
We have another question from the polymath. He wants to know your perception as far as Pentecostals, specifically using controlling techniques as far as sexuality goes. Is there any sort of substantial difference between them and any other sects?
Well, first of all, Pentecostals are batshit crazy. We can just establish that right off the top. Anybody talking in tongues and having regular hallucinations and conversations with deities, there's something really strange going on there. But that's really no different than early or any other cult, including Christianity, Catholicism. I think Pentecostal sexual guilt, every religion, as I write about in Sex and God, every religion has its own unique pattern of sexual guilt. And the Pentecostals have a unique pattern that's different than Catholic sexual guilt and different than Jewish sexual guilt or Islamic sexual guilt. It's still insidious. It's just its own method. I don't know if you've heard, I believe it was the Atheist Experience number 645. First time I was on, a guy named Rich Lyons called in to talk to me specifically, and Matt on the Atheist Experience. And he told the story that I recount in my book. he told the story of being married 20 years to his wife as a Pentecostal minister, and they had sex 12 times. He also tells the story that at one point in time, virtually every man in his congregation came to him for counseling because their wives had totally lost interest in sex. Now, can you imagine 200 or 300 men over the course of a few years coming to Rich, who's only had sex 12 times?
I cannot imagine that lifestyle.
I can't either. But so what, in answer to your question, or the question, what Pentecostalism is doing is women have at least as high a sex drive as men. Women like sex a lot. And quite frankly, a woman can have a hell of a lot more sex than any man could ever satisfy. Just the way they're built. So if you have that high a sex drive and capacity, Pentecostalism is able to destroy that in 300 parishioners in Rich Lyons Church. That is incredible power within a single religion. I suggest it's more powerful than Catholicism. They've got a better lock on sexual guilt than even the Catholics had. Now the Catholics are losing it because nobody listens to the Pope anymore. They're all on birth control. Or they're all abstinent. I'm not sure which.
I just want to actually come in with a question of my own. I just want to get into the God virus, mainly because I'm studying microbiology and it's quite an important subject. So I really love the connection between religion and virology. I just want to ask two questions. One, on the lead up to the show, I actually tried to buy the God virus, but over here I never realized it, but it's actually sold as the Religion virus in Europe. I just want to know why.
No, there's another book called The Religion Virus. That's not my book. No, there's two books. Religion Virus is different than my book, The God Virus.
Okay, so that pretty much answers that one. And I just want to how did you notice, or how did you come about this observation of religion and viruses and being able to analyze the two, or have the two as an analogy? I mean,
Well, words. I read in 1989, Richard Dawkins published an essay called "Viruses of the Mind." And of course, in his earlier book, The Selfish Gene, he talked about memes and memetics. After I read that essay, and of course read The Selfish Gene, I didn't read them till much later, like in the early 2000s. It hit me like a ton of bricks that he's a biologist, but this method, this idea of memes and memetics, works pretty darn well for religion. Now he does talk about that, but he's not a psychologist. And I also looked at Daniel Dennett. He's a philosopher, and I looked at Sam Harris. He's a neuropsychologist, but not clinical. And what's the Christopher Hitchens? I love all these guys, but none of them are psychologists, and none of them are looking at how religion actually gets into the brain. And I realized it has a pathogenic component to it. I could have called it the God fungus. I could have called it the God parasite, because it functions the same in any of those. So I just started exploring this. And when I was writing the God virus, I just said, let me explore how this works. And the more I explored it, the more amazed I was at how well the metaphor works. And it is a metaphor. I do not claim that religion is a virus. I claim it acts like a virus. It looks a whole lot like viruses when you analyze the way it infects people. And I talk about it being, religion is a sexually transmitted disease. You get it from your parents. And 95% of all people take on the religion of their parents, or a religion very close to their parents. You may have been born a Baptist, but now you're a Nazarene. Not that far away. So that's how I got into this. and once I realized how well it worked, I just kept exploring it, and the metaphor works remarkably well. The metaphor of infection and transmission of disease. I mean, when a Jehovah's Witness comes to your door and knocks, or a Mormon comes to your door and knocks, they're trying to sneeze on you. They're trying to give you their God virus, just like somebody sneezing on you somewhere else gives you a cold. Does that answer your question?
Yes, and I just want to maybe take this analogy a little bit further. How do you get vaccinated, or is there a vaccine for religion?
Yes, it works perfectly. As we're seeing this year in the United States, the flu vaccine is only 60% effective, which actually is pretty good. But there's no way to totally protect against this. But let me just illustrate this. If you're raising children, the religion has to get you into religion while your rational immune system is still immature. You'll probably notice when kids go off to school, go off to preschool, they come back with all sorts of colds and other illnesses because they're getting them from other kids. What we now know about human biology is your immune system needs to be exposed to lots of pathogens because that strengthens your immune system. It's almost like a muscle. If you use a muscle, it strengthens it. If your immune system is being challenged all the time, your immune system becomes strong. And if you try to protect a child from infections, then when the infection comes, it actually makes them sicker. There's a lot of evidence out there now for that. So if you take the God virus metaphor and look at it in the same way, you'll see that if you expose children to lots of different religions, then you're giving them the vaccine. So I tell parents, don't try to protect your children from religion. I think it's the biggest mistake atheists make is they say, I'm not raising my kid with a religion. And I'm thinking, that's probably not a good idea. Religion is everywhere. And sooner or later, they're going to get infected or they're going to be exposed to a religion. You want them to be prepared. So take them to a Baptist church. Take them to a Muslim church. Go everywhere. Expose these children ages to different religions. And then when they get enough to have a good, solid, rational immune system, they'll figure out all religions are batshit crazy. They're none of them got anything to offer.
That rings very true for me because I was raised in an atheist household, and my parents were really, shall we say, religion was simply not a topic of conversation. And when I was exposed to religion in elementary school, it was taught in a non-confessional way. That's basically when I first got exposed to it, really, and I became really interested in it, and I actually started reading the Bible, and that's when I realized that, yeah, this is complete bullshit. So, yeah.
Well, good for your parents. Where do you live? In Sweden?
Yeah.
Oh, so, and I'm going to make this slight difference. The advice I gave earlier is what I give to American parents. I don't think that advice is as relevant in places like Sweden, where you've got a high number of atheists. But
yeah, that's probably true.
You still want to educate kids because they're still. I mean, Islam is coming into Malmo big time, and you don't want that infecting one of your kids, and it could if you don't educate them very well. I mean, you know the situation in Malmo, I'm assuming, among other places. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you see it in Paris too. Wherever there's been Islamic immigration, you're seeing fundamentalists come in and doing just horrendous things. And they set up their own legal system. Female genital mutilation is practiced on a regular basis. I mean, there's just all sorts of crazy stuff. Because Islam is very effective at infecting and keeping people infected. And I would also say this, even in Sweden, you have New Age stuff. You have people
Yeah,
who think,
that's true. That's
yeah,
true.
crystals and all that kind of craziness. You still need to educate your children about just rational thinking to challenge the assumptions that somebody who thinks there's spirits out there in the forest. You know, I'm not anti-pagan or Wicca, but I still think they're crazy to think there's spirits dancing around out there in the forest every winter solstice or whatever.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah, they may not do a lot of harm, but when it comes to learning about what's actually true, then yeah, then it's harmful, of course.
Yeah, it can be very harmful.
All right,
There's
we have. Oops, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say we have another question from the audience. Wild Eyes asks, is it true that many religious people that are raised in a religious household, because I believe it's true that many religious households tend to be okay with sort of spanking the child. Is it true that many religiously raised people are into BDSM due to the environment of being spanked as a child?
You know, I've actually looked at that a bit. There was a slight error in the introduction I just want to correct, and that'll also lead into what we're talking about here. Was it Kitch introduced me? Who was introduced me?
Sorry, that was me.
Okay, anyway, you said my second book, my book was Sex and Secularism. That was not my book. My book is Sex and God, How Religion Distorts Sexuality.
Sorry.
But that's okay, because you made it was a legitimate mistake, because before I published the book, I published a study called Sex and Secularism. So that's where you got that from. We did an online survey of 14,560 people who are all atheists now. And we asked them, you know, about their sex lives. 80% of those people had been raised religious. And one of the things we asked them, you know, is about their kinks, their fetishes, their lifestyle sexually. And while we found that 28% of those 14,560, we found that 28% of them were kinky. So they're into some kind of BDSM. I'm just saying, you know. But 80% were raised in religious environments. We also tried to look at we asked how fundamentalist, how guilt-ridden was the religion you were raised in, and we compared that to how kinky people were, and we really didn't see much of a correlation, because that was a question we had. Your questioner is right on target. You might think sexually abusive religious environments might lead to BDSM, and I'm not saying they don't. It's just that we didn't find a heck of a lot of evidence for that. Yeah, great question. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty thought-provoking. So we're kind of clear on the audience questions, and I don't think we have any callers lined up. But I did have another question that I wanted to ask. Was there anything positive that you took from religion? And I asked this question because in doing research for the show, I saw that you were a solo tenor in church choirs. And for me, while I don't enjoy I don't particularly find the subject matter of, you know, religious music to be valid, I still find the music itself to be a rather beautiful environment to be experiencing. So that's sort of what I'm referencing when I ask, is there anything positive from your religious experiences that you sort of kept after you left the religion itself?
You know, I loved singing, and I don't want to sound too egotistical, I was a pretty darn good tenor. I mean, churches were paying me to come sing in their choirs and sing solos and on the radio and stuff like that. So, and I really enjoyed singing, especially classical. I loved Handel's Messiah. I liked Mendelssohn. You know, I liked the classical religious music. Yeah, I think there's a lot of positive in the religious music. It's obviously, religion has inspired a lot of positive, a lot of beautiful music. But so has sex. Sex has inspired a heck of a lot of beautiful music. I mean, we wouldn't have the Beatles today if it wasn't for sex. I mean, that's what most of their songs are about, isn't it?
Yeah, I'd say a lot of them.
Yeah.
Either that or drug use.
Yeah, you could probably find something good about religion. I just look at the harm it creates, the incredible amount of problems it creates, and how it puts complications between you and the real world. The benefits are just far outweighed by the liabilities. I mean, if I'm going to make an investment in something and they're telling me you have a 10% potential of benefiting and a 90% potential of losing everything, it's not much of an investment. I'm not going to take that risk. And that's what religion is. Yeah, you might go to church and enjoy the music, but let me illustrate something to you. And I use this in my talks, especially when I talk about my book, The God Virus. And I'm glad we cleared up that little difficulty, because I would, much prefer you read my book than somebody else's. And this book's not bad. I'm not going to diss it. It's not a bad book, just not as good as mine, of course. So,
of course.
And I certainly say the same thing about his. So we're leaving on that. Oh yeah. I like singing, so I actually sing a song in one of my presentations. I sing The Amazing Grace. Just think of the words. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see. Now it is a very pretty tune with very ugly words.
Yeah.
Yes.
And trying to show in God Virus is the power of hypnosis to infect your brain. Music is among the most hypnotic activities you ever do, because most of us don't go to a hypnotist. We don't go to a psychotherapist that hypnotizes us to help us or anything. We go to church. And we go to church, we get hypnotized through the minister's sermons, through the music. The words are getting processed in your brain in one part, while the music's getting processed in another part. The words are embedding guilt messages. I mean, you're a worthless, no good piece of shit without Jesus. That's what the song is saying.
Yeah.
What a beautiful piece of music. So yeah, even the most beautiful stuff is filled with danger, I think. So, one of the biggest problems I had in late his career is I loved the music, I hated the words. And it was getting harder and harder and harder to stand up in front of a congregation and sing these horrendous words, as beautiful as the music was. And so one of the last times I ever sang in public, I did a little experiment. I sang a song called Jerusalem, which is a gorgeous piece with a lot of guilt messages to it. And I told myself, I'm going to get half a dozen people crying today. That's my goal. And I got up there and I sang my soul out. And lo and behold, I got a dozen people had eyes when I was finished. And then I thought to myself, I can manipulate the hell out of other people with my music. It has nothing to do with it, Jesus or God. And that was the last time I ever sang in public, except for my daughter's wedding. But that's not that's mandatory. You can't avoid your daughter's wedding. It's pretty religious, unfortunately.
Go ahead.
Have another question there?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we do. Firstly, before I do the question, I want to say that you still got it as far as singing goes.
Yeah, and also I'll just button just to let everyone know we are featured on the front page of Blog TV. So if you are watching there, come in, join the discussion. We're talking mostly sex and religion with our special guest, Dr. Darrel Ray.
So come on down and enjoy the sexual speak. So we have a question from Jay, who asked, how would you recommend sex be explained to children in different stages of their lives when they start to ask questions?
Well, that's a great question, and it's actually not as difficult as you might think. There's some very, very good books out there now that are secular and age appropriate for children. When we did our research on sex and secularism, on the online survey, we found some really interesting results that then led us to some answers about sex education for kids. What we found was 38% of secular parents are teaching their children about sex and sex education, which is pretty piss poor. I mean, that's really bad. 38%. You would hope that secular people would be more in tune with the needs of children for information. Yeah. But we also asked of the most religious in our sample, only 13% were educating their children. And unfortunately, when they were, quote, educating their children, they weren't really educating them on sex ed. They were telling them sex is bad and condoms don't work. Yeah. So what we saw in both the religious and the secular side is there's not very good sex education going on. We also saw that the top most guilty religions were, let me let you guys guess before I say it. What's the most guilt-ridden, sexually guilt-ridden religion?
Catholic.
I'm going to go with Islam.
I'm going to go with, I'm tied between the two, Catholicism and Islam.
Okay, well, I'm not going to count Islam because they didn't have very big sample. It was mainly a U.S., UK, Australia, and Canada responded to our survey.
Right. Well, in that case, I'd go with Catholicism.
Catholics, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what most people say, but that's not the case. Number one was Mormons.
All right.
Number two was Pentecostals. Number three, Seventh-day Adventists. And number four, Jehovah's Witnesses. And those top four were all really high and very close together. Mormons didn't beat anybody else out very much. Catholics were down about 60% in our sample. In other words, 40% of, about 40% of the religions were even more guilt-based than Catholics. Because I think we see a lot of cafeteria Catholics in the United States now. They're not listening to the Pope. So what we did find on the other side was very interesting, and that was, I guessed, my hypothesis was that atheists and agnostics would be the least guilty in sex. That wasn't the case, though. Unitarians had the least sexual guilt. So I started inquiring, why are Unitarians less sexually guilty? And I found out they've got this incredibly good sex education program called All Our Lives. And it's age appropriate. It's taught to every age of child up through adolescence and high school. And it's sex positive, it's gay friendly. It's, teaches good contraception techniques and all that sort of stuff. So I was just blown away. I had no idea that the Unitarians had this kind of education going on. So that's one answer I have to your questioner. Get a hold of the Unitarians' sex education. Or send your kids to a Unitarian church. I don't say go to church very often here, guys, so you heard it first. Second, get online and look for good sex education, secular books for children. And I don't have I've got 2 or 3 of them in my library, but I don't have them. Well, I don't even have them now. I loaned them to somebody, so I don't remember the names right offhand. So that's, yeah, another answer. Honest. Don't bullshit kids. Give them age-appropriate answers. If a kid comes up to you and says, Mommy or Daddy, did you have sex before marriage? Tell them, sure I did. It's okay. But I used condoms. I was very careful emotionally. I wanted to be with the right person. We had birth control or whatever. And be honest with them. If they're 5 years old, they're probably not going to be asking that question. They're going to say, Mommy, how did the kid have kitty? How did our cat have kitties? And be honest with them there too. So I think honesty is the best policy in sex education. You won't go wrong.
we have yet another question for the audience, one cross each. Adultery can be negative and damaging to relationships and families. Is religion justified in condemning it and even punishing it?
Well, let's put it this way. I don't particularly like the word adultery, and I'm not going to accept the religion's definition of it. What I will say is dishonesty in sexual relationships is what I abhor. I mean, in our popular culture, we call it cheating.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, and I write extensively in the end of Sex and God, last 5 chapters of Sex and God are designed to answer that kind of question. I think we should be looking at how do we honestly communicate with our wives, our husbands, our children, our lovers, and not be dishonest, because I see dishonesty is rampant in sexuality. And part of that's because we've been taught this incredibly stupid idea about monogamy, that humans are monogamous, which is one of the dumber ideas on the planet. There's almost no species on this planet is monogamous, certainly not we humans. So what I try to teach and what I personally practice is honesty with my lovers. If I'm involved with more than one person, everybody knows it. Polyamory is the philosophy that open honesty about your sexuality is going to be healthier for everybody. I mean, I can't protect myself against something I know nothing about. You have the right to know what I'm doing if you're one of my lovers, and vice versa. And what a refreshing way to go about it. It's not cheating. Now, by definition, religious definition, it might be adultery. Is if I'm married and I'm having sex outside of my marital relationship, that's adultery. But I don't think that's wrong. If it's with permission, if all parties are aware of what's going on, enthusiastically, and I don't mean you coerced your spouse, let outside partner. If it's enthusiastic, with permission, I think it's perfectly fine.
So you would say that people who are perhaps swingers, if they agree with each other as far as the state of affairs goes with the context of being swingers, then totally cool, right?
Absolutely. And there's some interesting stuff's gone on around that. I've noted this over the years, and even some research. Women are more reluctant to move into the swinging community than men are. But here's the irony. Once women get into the swinging community, it oftentimes flips. Women love it, and men are much more threatened by it. Now, that doesn't mean it's not good for both. It just means you're having to deal with some issues you probably didn't think about before. But just think about this. Women have an incredibly high capacity for sex. Why would we... I would no longer force my spouse to eat steak every night for the rest of their life than I will force my lover to have the same kind of sex for the rest of your life. There's something in psychology called satiation. It's a simple concept. If you have steak every night for the rest of your life, you're going to get pretty sick of steak. If you have missionary position sex for the rest of your life, you're probably going to slow down and not have much sex. If you have a wide variety, and humans love variety, I mean, if you're a parent and you raise children, you know, a child will get tired of a toy pretty fast, and then they want a different toy. They may go back to the original toy, but they like lots of toys and lots of variety. Well, the same thing for anything else in life. I want lots of different kinds of food to eat. I want lots of different kinds of sex to have. Now, let me have this with a caveat. I talk about something in the book called sociosexual orientation, and I bet most of your listeners have never heard of this idea before. You can just get online and Google sociosexual orientation, and you can actually take a 9-item questionnaire to find out what you score. People who score high on sociosexual orientation on a 9-point scale, 1 to 9, they like lots of variety, lots of stimulation, lots of adventure. People who score low generally don't want lots of sex partners, don't want lots of variety, don't need lots of adventure. And you know what? Both of those are okay. They're both normal. What happens is religion is really good at encouraging the low social sexual orientation people, because they're the ones that don't want lots of sex, don't want lots of sex partners, and then the religion teaches them to be judgmental of everybody else. It's almost like saying you're born as an introvert, and introverts are the best, so you can be judgmental about all those stupid extroverts out there. Well, it's the same concept. This is a personality construct called socio-sexual orientation. And you're born with it. It's about 50% genetic, just kind of like what we were talking about earlier on religion. If you're born with a high socio-sexual orientation, I will guarantee you, you will have a wide number of sex partners over your lifetime. You will like lots of adventure, lots of variety. If you're born with a low socio-sexual orientation, you may be monogamous with one partner for your entire life. And there's nothing wrong with either one of those choices. Here's the problem. What happens if you are a low sexual orientation, social orientation, and you marry somebody that's higher? Let's say you're a score 2 and you marry somebody who's got a 6. What's going to happen is you're going to have conflict in your marriage, because the 6 is much more bright than the 2 wants. If the 2 is religious, it doubles the problem, because the religious are going to say, well, you're a sex maniac, you're a sex addict, all that bullshit. By the way, get online and read Klein's article called You're Addicted. What? And he blows the whole idea of sexual addiction out of the water. There is no such thing as sexual addiction. And anybody who tells you that is probably a minister or a Sunday school teacher or a sex addict counselor, but they're not a psychologist, because psychology has no diagnosis of sex addict. How did I get to be?
I'm not quite sure. We kind of went off on some tangents there.
This is important information to start thinking about. That's why I wrote the book. I want to challenge every one of us atheists and secularists to look at how much we've been infected with religious bullshit. And you don't even realize how much you've been infected by it. I guarantee you're infected and don't even know it.
Yeah, I mean, I've tried to get over a lot of the things that I used to consider sexual taboos in the past, and it's exceedingly difficult. But you know, if you just view things rationally after an extended period of time, you tend to kind of go into this very accepting mode, and very accepting of people who want to be in open relationships, so long as they both agree to do it. I'm okay with people who are polyamorous now. I used to have a problem with it. I don't anymore. I still have a problem with polygamy, but we've went over polygamy before.
Well, I have a problem with polygamy too. Yeah.
Yeah, we've been over it. Yeah. Before I ask another one of the questions from the audience, you went over sex addiction and how it very likely doesn't exist. Speaking, I know it's worth very little as far as an empirical standpoint, a personal anecdote, but I do have a personal experience with a self-described nymphomaniac, and just what I will say is that the one that I met is very anomalous when I speak of the entirety of the people that I've been with, so to speak. She would, I want to phrase this in a safe manner. When you meet somebody who is a self-described nymphomaniac, you are very excited about the prospect, but then you realize that they want sex all night long. I'll be woken up in the middle of the night at 3 o'clock. Let's do it again. I'll be woken up at 5 o'clock in the morning. Let's do it again. As soon as I wake up to go to work, let's do it right before you go to work. It's very constant, and it's very tiring, and it's different from what I'm used to. So as far I guess you can't really say that it's sex addiction, but it's somebody who really, really, really enjoys it at the very least.
Well, no. Let me. I'm not saying there's not problems. I'm not saying that. I'm saying there's no such thing as sexual addiction. People do things for psychological reasons. For example, one way to deal with depression is have lots of sex. One way to deal with depression is to masturbate a lot. I have had people saying I'm addicted to masturbation, I'm addicted to pornography. But when you look, as a psychologist, if I look underneath the hood, so to speak, get underneath and look at what's driving this behavior, you soon realize it's not sex. Sex is the symptom. And that's what we need to understand. If somebody is engaging in destructive behavior, whether it's sex or the constant for dangerous activities, climbing mountains or something, I don't know. I'm a mountain climber, so I've got to be careful on that one. You have to look underneath and say, what might be driving this? It could be an excessive, obsessive compulsive disorder of some kind. It could be a personality component. It could be depression. And that's why it's important to look at this as a whole psychological a person, not just the sex. Here's the problem. Religions love this idea of sex addiction. Why? Because it makes you feel guilty about something and brings you back to church. I'm not going to tell somebody sex addiction. I'm going to tell somebody, let's try and understand what might be driving these poor choices on your part. Now, I don't know this woman, and I do not do diagnosis without knowing somebody, but let's just talk about this self-described nymphomaniac. Like I said earlier, women have a much bigger capacity for sex than men do, so that right there could count for some of it. The other thing is she's finding ways to compensate for fear of loss, fear of abandonment. There's people who are, they have an incredible need to be connected with somebody else. It's very needy. It's need-based, and it's unhealthy. That could be driving. So if I was working with her, I'd say, well, let's try and understand what drives you to want sex so much. How much of it's because you just need to feel connected to another human being, and is there other ways to be connected to human beings besides sex? I'm not going to condemn her for her sex drive. I'm going to help her understand what might be driving it. It may or may not the number of times she wants sex per night. You may be exhausted anyway. I don't know. By the way, send her my way.
I think to be honest, if I'm going to speak personally here, I think everybody should encounter a nymphomaniac at one point in their life. I'm just saying. It's a good experience. It's a tiring experience, but it's a good experience. So that's just my input as far as that goes. So we have another question from the audience. Monkey Ballster is one of our. He's been dogging us for a while, and but he asks a fairly sensible question, I think. What is your opinion of what is known as the Oedipus complex? Do you think it's valid? Where does it come from? All those kinds of details.
Well, that goes back to Freudian psychology, which I have very little use for. I'm more a rational behaviorist, and I think the concepts of Oedipus, Electra complex, that's the flip side of Oedipus, is Electra complex. Those are pretty early concepts out of Freudian psychology that goes clear back to the 1910s and earlier. I don't think they got much relevance here today. We have a hell of a lot more understanding of neurology. We have a lot more understanding about the biochemistry of the brain. We know a lot more about behaviorism. We know a lot more about how cognitive psychology works. We just don't have a need for those concepts anymore. I like looking at a good Model T, Ford Model T going down the road, but it was manufactured in 1912. Would I want to own one? No. Well, yeah, I'd want to own one for its collector's value, not for its transportation value. And that's kind of what we see. It's a part of the history. We don't believe the world's flat anymore. We think the world's round. Well, Oedipus, Electra, Freudian psychodynamics were really our early understanding, early attempt to understand what's going on inside the brain. And it was an Earth is flat hypothesis. We've since kind of gotten beyond that. So yeah, that's my answer to your question. There's so much to learn about psychology and neurology and biochemistry. So I would encourage your questioner to go look at those things and treat Freud as a nice historical footnote.
Yeah, I mean, for Freud, he was a good foundation for what we consider to be modern psychology, only in the same sense that we consider, Aristotle, Socrates to be good foundations to Western thought and philosophy. I mean, sure, they started a lot of stuff, but they also got a lot of stuff wrong.
Yeah.
So.
Well, Watson was a contemporary of Freud's, and I think Watson gave us a hell of a lot more good psychology than Freud ever dreamed of. And V.F. Skinner came along; he gave us even better psychology. And then probably after him came Dr. Albert Ellis, who gave us even better psychology. And it just kept going. And I was a student of Dr. Ellis's back in the late 70s. Like you said earlier on, I'm an old man, so I can remember some of these things.
All right, so we have 20 minutes left in the show. Gotta try and find a way to fill up the rest of the show. So I guess I'll just ask you this question. What was it like going to colleges that are specifically aimed for Christians?
Well, I went to Friends University. That was fun. Talking about my personal experience?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Well, I went to Friends University, and they required 2 religion courses during the course of your bachelor's degree. I didn't just take 2. I took 4. I was very interested. And I didn't find it. Friends was a Quaker school. It was a pretty liberal Quaker school. So I didn't find it particularly restrictive. What I found was restrictive was my home environment. And my wife, my first wife, she went to an incredibly fundamentalist college called Ozark Bible College in Joplin, Missouri. And if you guys seen the news, that's where the big tornado hit a couple of years ago and killed all those people. But I remember my wife, I'd go over to take her out, and they had a curfew of 10 o'clock on weeknights and 11 o'clock on weekends, and they would make her kneel down on the floor to make sure that her skirt touched the floor. If your skirt didn't touch the floor when you kneeled down, then you couldn't go out.
That's so weird.
Yeah, it was. But here's the funny thing. They were so sex negative. They were so paranoid about these 18, 19, 20-year-old kids having sex, and they would try to restrict them. But every semester, several girls would leave college and never come back. And you always had the hardest time finding out, well, what happened to Sally or what happened to Jane? And almost inevitably, they got pregnant.
Yeah.
And all too often, they got pregnant. Either they were preachers' kids or they got pregnant with a preacher's kid. Preachers' kids were terribly sexually active. And, they had learned the charms of religion from their fathers. And a lot of these preachers have affair after affair after affair. And I saw this as I was growing up. I saw in 1 year, in 1 year I saw 8 different ministers get caught having affairs just in our little town, Wichita, Kansas. Now, I misspoke. I said 1 year. Over a 10-year period, I saw 8 different ministers get caught. Now, if you're smart enough to run a big church, it's not to get caught very often. So if 8 ministers got caught over a 10-year period, I'm thinking it probably happened 80 times, not 8 times. It's just the way it works. So what I saw was more the restrictiveness, not in the colleges. Now, here's another interesting thing. I went to Scarrett College for Christian Workers, and it was obviously a very religious school. I soon learned that half of the students there were gay or lesbian. And I don't think I'd ever met a gay or lesbian person my whole life. And I go to this college, graduate school, and here's all these gays and lesbians. Of course, they're kind of under the cover, but it's like a school seemed to attract those kinds of people, gays and lesbians. And it was quite an education, right? Being a fundamentalist from Wichita. But it was a Methodist seminary, and My whole family knew I was going to hell the minute I went to a Methodist seminary. By the way, I guess there were too many gays and lesbians, and the fundamentalists didn't want to support them anymore. I don't think that's a very good answer to your question, because I didn't experience a really big problem, as my wife did, but not me.
Oh, Jesus. I apologize that I'm very distracted because there is someone in the chat room that is just completely screwing things up for everybody. So we have a potential caller, I believe. The caller wants to talk about playing God and population control. I'm not quite sure what that means, but I'll go ahead, with Zulu's permission, I'll go ahead and bring him in. Is that okay, Zulu?
Yeah, you can go ahead.
All right, I'll go ahead and bring him in then. And if you could give him a call, Zulu, I think you're the one that needs to do that since you're the host.
I don't have him on my contact list, so he needs to send a request to him.
And just, I apologize for the problem with the chat. I have no idea what's going on. I think we should probably contact Dog TV to get that sorted.
Yeah, there's some guy who's making a bunch of different accounts, spamming the chat, and it's really screwing things up. Anyway, Sub-Zero Bob, welcome to the show. What do you have to talk to Dr. Ray about?
Okay, so I got banned from the chat.
I'm sorry
not
about
sure
that.
where
It's
the feed
just
is.
it's getting very hectic in there trying to get rid of the spammer at the moment. So give me time.
Yeah,
Okay,
and
so
also
you're gonna
just to let everyone know, the spammer is actually taking account names that are very similar to account names in the chat. So if you do get banned by accident, please don't take offense to it. It's just
we're working on it, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
But Zulu, you know who I am, so you're gonna put me back in, right?
You're in. So ask your question, please.
Okay, good. So yeah, basically I was listening, and one thing that caught my attention was when we were talking about the scale of the sexual interest, if it's a lower scale or high scale. Both of these things are not good or not bad on their own, but they do have implications on what type of people do survive or do continue to make up humanity, of what humanity is comprised of. So my question was to say that if a group of people with lower interest in sexual desires is sort of say like not naturally selected, but almost like artificially selected, wouldn't it get to the point where we start to ask questions that are like godlike questions, more like why do we have to be born if we have to die? Like it's like meaningless to live, because it's actually inefficient in a way, because you're born and then you have to die. It just doesn't make sense, more or less. I mean, that's my train of thought right now. It's in a rambling mode. It's still not, and a lot of the things that I do is like that. So I apologize for that.
Well, you just described biology. It happens to every organism on the planet. So sorry to say, you're going to live, you're going to die. So let's figure out what we do in between. That's my attitude. And there's no God's going to tell you what to do in between. And there's no God's going to reward you when you're finished. Yeah. But I do think the fact is we have a genetic component to us, and that genetic component pushes us different ways. It's pretty obvious if you think about something as obvious as common as extroversion and introversion. We know there's a huge genetic component to being extrovert or introvert, and you're not going to change it. If you were born an introvert, you're not going to flip to become an extrovert sometime later. That'd be very unusual. And if you're born an extrovert, you're not going to flip and become an introvert. If you're an analytical kind of a person who likes numbers and mathematics, you're probably not going to turn into a Pablo Picasso and be a great abstract art painter. I mean, our brains literally are wired through our genetics in very specific ways. Now, we still have very plastic brains, and they have quite a bit of leeway there, but some of these things are just really strong. And that's what I'm talking about when I talk about socio-sexual orientation. It just is. Accept it. You accept that you have dark hair. You accept that you've got brown eyes or got light skin or dark skin. You really don't have a choice. That's the way your genes work. And that's personality. I go into some great detail in the book talking about personality and understanding personality, and recognize that 50% of personality is genetic. And religion comes along and says, but only certain kinds of personality are acceptable. And that's what I object to. Religion doesn't understand what personality does, how it functions. And one personality is social sexual orientation. That's why I talk about it so much. So I hope my rambling a little bit answered your rambling.
No, actually, I'm actually able to focus my question a little bit better, I guess, because there's nothing you can do about your genetics, but the outcome of your will could be devastating to humanity. Like, for example, if I'm a person with low sexual desire or sexual exploitation, explore sexual deviation, and I decide that it is worthless, that life is meaningless, senseless, nothingness. Like, and how can you prevent the suffering in life that everybody faces? In other words, why do you have to be born if you have to die? You know what I mean? That the whole thing doesn't look sensible to me. If it doesn't look sensible to me, and I'm a introvert or whatever the word is you use, then the one way I could do this is to play God and say the way that we can decide not to be born in order to stop the suffering of having to deal with the fact that we're going to die. And just deciding that everybody stop procreating, stop having babies, will just die off, and then that's devastating to humanity. And in a sense, it comes from this low negative approach towards having sexual desires or whatever. If that is my gene.
Yeah, I don't think you're on the same track as I am at all. What you're saying is not related at all to what I'm saying. We have genetics, period, and you just tend to go one way or the other. We don't have, as humans, we don't have any trouble propagating. We got 7 billion people on the planet, going to 9 billion. We got far too many people on this planet already, and what we have seen is a dramatic decline in birth rates whenever women are liberated. The lowest birth rates on the planet are where women have the most rights. The highest birth rates on the planet are where women are most oppressed. And that has nothing to do with socio-sexual orientation. You can only want sex once a month and still have 20 kids. Having kids is not a problem. And what your level of desire is not a problem at all. That's irrelevant because we propagate so easily as a species. I mean, we're a pest to this planet right now. This entire planet is suffering because there's far too many of us using far too many resources, destroying far too many biosystems. So I'm not worried about humans being devastated. We are the devastators. It's not us that are getting devastating, it's our planet that's getting devastated. So a little less birth would be a great thing.
Yeah, I think a lot of people need to be responsible.
Where does will have a play in this? Like, if I'm a low sexual guy, and then I have to force myself to have sex in order to procreate, in order to ensure the continuity of our species, whereas, like, I stop forcing myself. I just give up that will, and I say, you know what, forget it. It's not worth it. It's actually better if there's no humanity on this world, on this planet.
You're confusing a whole lot of things.
And I promote that.
Can I intervene here? You're confusing tons of things. Go be a philosopher. Go talk to a philosopher somewhere. It has nothing to do with the biology I'm talking about. Also, whether you have meaning or life, that's your choice. Whether you have sex or not, that's your choice. You may be an asexual person. You just may not like or need sex at all. Some people are like that. And it's nothing right or wrong about it. I've known a number of asexual people. They're perfectly fine people. They seem to find all sorts of meaning in life. They write books. They teach courses. They take college. They seem to be just fine. Meaning and sex can or cannot be related. You make that choice. So do whatever you want with your sex life. I don't care. But don't. What you're asking is not tied to ultimate meaning and purpose in the world. You'll have to figure that one out.
But at which point does like the population of these genetic people gather together and say, well, we think that this is that what we think our like genetics dictate us is, and then they just mandate it for everybody to decide that the humanity is the pest and get rid of it off the planet and stop procreating and start lobbying government or making their will the primary will over religion or whatever. Like,
well, you're in the realm of science.
Genetics is the background of it. And
you're
saying,
in the realm of science fiction right now. I don't have much to say about that. You're in science fiction, and you're talking about something called eugenics, which is obviously wrong and
it's not even eugenics.
Human rights.
It's not even eugenics, Dr. Ray. This is a not very well kept philosophical stance called antinatalism, and the notion of the stance is that humanity as a whole will always suffer the longer that we exist. Therefore, we should have no more kids, so that we should all die out. It's a very Philistine, as far as I'm concerned, philosophical.
Yeah, it sounds like it's related to nihilism.
It's not even nihilism, because the people involved in antinatalism tend to believe that suffering is like the most important moral thing to ever focus yourself on, and all the good stuff that doesn't matter because none of that makes up for the suffering, because the suffering is all bad and it's the worst thing in the world. We can't get rid of it unless we're all dead, so just everyone should just die out. And it's not very out.
If that's the case, here's what you go do. Go be a Catholic priest. Go be a Catholic priest. That's what they like. They like lots of suffering and they don't like to procreate. So go for it.
But I think that's not,
anyway,
that's not right. I don't think that's equated with that. I think they're actually on the exact opposite. And what the question ties into is who is to make that decision, or who decides it's wrong. And who decided it's right?
You decide. If you don't want to procreate, then don't procreate.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Okay, we're going to have to wrap up.
We're going to have to wrap up the show. Thanks for the call, Bob.
We're going to have to wrap up. So sorry, Sub-Zero Bob. If you would have called in earlier, we would have been able to continue this conversation a bit more. But it is 2:59. We have to wrap up now. We've been going on for about 2 hours now.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go ahead and let Zulu sign the rest of us out.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, all the callers, all the questions, and everyone in the chat room that's not bot or spammer. Please thumbs up for Dr. Ray. And we will be back in 2 weeks' time. Our guest is Herb Silverman, president of Secular Coalition of America and author of the book Candidate Without a Prayer. So big thanks to my team, Kitch.
See you guys, and I'll see you all in 3 months' time because I'm off to Singapore.
But I think you're back for when we have Sanal on the show. You're going to make an appearance for that one.
Yeah, I'm going to try to make.
Can I say something before we sign off?
Yeah, sure.
Tell your friends in Australia that I'll be there next month. I'm going to talk in Sydney. I'm going to be in Brisbane, and I'm going to talk in Tasmania.
All right.
So I'm going to do a little book tour in Australia next month.
And everyone in the room, if you want to find out more, go into Amazon and look up Darrel Ray, and you'll find the books there. I think they're available on Kindle as well, if I remember right.
Yes. and audible.com. They came out. They'll both be out by next month. Godvirus is out now on Audible.
Okay, just mark
And bear in mind, the recording of this is going to be uploaded to YouTube under Trolling with Logic, the YouTube channel, and it's also going to be uploaded to iTunes. Feel free to share this with your friends. Feel free to share it on Facebook. Feel free to do whatever you want with it.
Yes,
so long as you don't distribute it and try to sell it for money, because then we'll come after you for profit.
And links to all that are down below in the playground. You'll find links to the iTunes, the YouTube, the Facebook, the Twitter, and like if you're a non-iTunes, you can subscribe to the podcast as well. So thank you very much, everyone. Good night, and we shall see you all in 2 weeks. Good night, everyone.
Good night. Don't forget to rate and sub.
Good night, guys, and great talking to you. Thank you.
Fantastic.